The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 20495 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to business. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if the Minister for Parliamentary Business would genuinely consider the point I'm about to put forward. I submitted an urgent question to the Presiding Officer out with the Times, and I'll raise this in a point of order if I have to after topical questions. However, we are being asked to agree a change of business today. My urgent question was asking government ministers to present to Parliament the written case they've now presented to court about the transgender prisoner policy. Now, we only became aware of this at 9:46 a.m. when the government issued a press release. That was 14 minutes for MSPs to, one, know about the press release, two, read the press release, read the written submission and get an urgent question in. I don't think that's physically possible to do. Therefore, to save me having to make a point of order asking for a suspension of standing orders, would the Minister consider, an addition to the motion today, to allow a statement from government ministers on this issue, given it was of such considerable cross-party importance last week at First Minister's questions, when John Swinney himself said it was right that all of the information was in the public domain? Surely, therefore, it's also right for ministers to be raising this, and I would hope perhaps the Minister for Parliamentary Business would consider that this is an issue that we should have a ministerial statement on today.
I call the Minister for Parliamentary Business.
First of all, to move the motion, Presiding Officer, I also point out to Douglas Ross, while I understand the interest in this subject, the business for today has been agreed by the Bureau, and we are sitting to 9 o'clock. But I would point out to him that there are other means through which to request a statement or an urgent question or whatever he sees fit to pursue. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that motion 20495 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is topical questions. And at question number 1, I call Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's admission of a likely link between issues with the water supply at Queen Elizabeth University Hospital and patient infections.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Presiding Officer, I would first like to offer my deepest condolences to all those families who have loved ones and are affected by the issues we are discussing today relating to the hospital's inquiry. Ministers take seriously all concerns relating to patient safety and patient care. That is why we established a statutory public inquiry to investigate in detail all matters relating to those cases of infection, providing patients and families with the answers to their questions and concerns. The closing statements from core participants were published by the inquiry on Friday the 16th of January. The contents of those statements will now be considered as part of the final inquiry hearings this week, and it would be inappropriate to comment further on these proceedings at this stage. We look forward to Lord Brodie's final report and recommendations that will be forthcoming in due course.
Sandesh Gulhani.
Declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. The unforgivable cover-up of infected water leading to the unnecessary death of cancer patients, including 2 children, is the most appalling and disgusting hospital scandal to engulf our health service. After over a decade of denial, we have had to drag the Health Secretary here today after NHS Glasgow admitted at the 11th hour, in the most sleek way, that the water system at the Queen Elizabeth caused infections in cancer patients. Victims include Gail Armstrong, Molly Coudenhey, and 10-year-old Millie Main, whose mother said last week that she'd been fighting 6 years for answers. Multiple hospital inspections as early as 2015 exposed the fact that water at the hospital was not safe and there was a high risk of subsequent infection. NHS Glasgow have spent years covering it up, silencing whistleblowers, gaslighting families and betraying the trust of patients. The calculated attempts at hiding the truth have denied the victim's family closure, and many more times, how many more times, must we say never again before this culture of secrecy and cover-up ends? So what is the Health Secretary doing to hold senior management of past and present at NHS Glasgow to account for their lies, failures and dereliction of duty.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, on the question of transparency, this Government brought forward the public inquiry so that the families, some of whom I have met and I pay tribute to for their work and for the diligence and undoubted trauma that they have experienced, so that we can ensure that there are answers to the questions that they're posing, as Dr Gulhani sets out. It's because we have instigated the public inquiry that I believe we are getting to the truth, and I think it's important we allow the public inquiry the space to consider its final conclusions, for the final report to be considered before we determine any final considerations. I'm duty-bound as a minister. There are very strict rules around seeking to influence or comment on or preempt public inquiries to do that, and I think it would be the best for Parliament to do likewise.
Sandesh Gulhani.
Cabinet Secretary, the issues with the water supply have not been solved, with a whistleblower telling me today that the pressure is so bad dishwashers have been out of action for months and taps stop running water monthly. It is time for honesty, transparency and accountability, and it shouldn't have taken a public inquiry to get here. For over a decade, successive SNP health secretaries have presided over a culture of secrecy and cover-up at the expense of patients. SNP ministers must take responsibility for this scandal. They have refused to intervene and hold senior management responsible, despite mounting evidence and patients demanding the truth. Nicola Sturgeon opened the hospital. Shona Robertson was health secretary at the time of Millie Main's death, and John Swinney served in really senior positions throughout. So for the sake of the victims, will the Scottish Government make clear who knew what and when, and will the Health Secretary commit today to say that anyone who was involved in a cover-up, even if they were senior government ministers, will face justice, including for corporate homicide?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, these are issues that are currently under live consideration of a public inquiry and an investigation by the Crown. It would be completely inappropriate for me to comment or preempt those investigations. On the situation around transparency and patient safety, these are issues that we take extremely seriously. It's why we instigated the statutory independent public inquiry that Lord Brodie presides over. Like all hospital sites, there is a comprehensive system of clinical oversight and patient safety monitoring at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. There has been no information reported through our robust governance arrangements which question the hospital's safety. And whilst the inquiry continues, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde are required to ensure that the hospitals remain safe for patients, and they will continue to closely monitor a range of data and quality indicators to demonstrate this. I add to that the work that has been done to establish the Patient Safety Commissioner, Karen Titchener, who I've had the pleasure to meet and now meet routinely, to underline this Government's commitment to patient safety and transparency for those impacted by these issues.
Jackie Bailey.
It is right to remind the Chamber that when the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital opened in 2015, Nicola Sturgeon was the First Minister, Shona Robertson was the Health Secretary and John Swinney was the Finance Minister. Their fingerprints are all over this. So we need to know what they knew, when they knew it, and exactly who pressured the Health Board to open the hospital before it was safe, causing the death of children. We know that the SNP only care about announcements rather than delivery. We've experienced the ferry with painted-on windows that has yet to sail, and now a hospital that ministers pushed to open when it was not safe to do so. So let me ask the Cabinet Secretary, who does he believe is responsible for the deaths of children at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, these are matters that are subject to live public inquiry and live Crown Office investigations. It would be completely inappropriate for ministers to comment on or to narrate what is going around those issues. Jackie Bailey says keep it secret. That is to the contrary. These are live public inquiries, one in which was instigated by the Scottish Government, and a Crown investigation that clearly will have to report. It would be completely inappropriate for ministers to seek to intervene, to suppress or to do anything other than allow those processes to continue. And, Presiding Officer, I think you'd expect nothing less of a Government Minister. Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The issue with the water supply has been going on for a number of years. And we know the hospital cannot function without a water supply. So can I ask what has changed to make that water supply safe, and what have you put in place to make sure that those that are in hospital just now remain safe?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I set out in response to the question from Mr Whittle's colleague, Dr Gulhani, all hospital sites have a comprehensive system of clinical oversight and patient safety monitoring, Queen Elizabeth included, and there has been no information reported through that governance process which questions the hospital safety. Of course, these are matters that require the attention of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde in ensuring, in terms of all health boards, in ensuring the safe and effective operation of their sites.
Stephen Kerr.
I draw the Chamber's attention to my register of interest as the Director of Whistleblowers UK. In relation to this scandal, there were whistleblowers in 2017, there are whistleblowers as early as 2015, and NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde have admitted that whistleblowers were subject to recrimination and retaliation. Whistleblowers were clearly ignored, and much worse besides. So I ask the Cabinet Secretary, without hiding behind any ongoing procedures, it's very clear there's something far wrong with the whistleblowing culture inside NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. So will he order an immediate review of whistleblowing culture and processes in all of Scotland's NHS boards?
In relation to the substantive question.
Presiding Officer, the issue at hand regards the hospital's inquiry is not an issue of procedure. It's very clear rules around ministerial comment or seeking to undermine or in any way influence a public inquiry. I hope Mr Kerr would understand that. However, in general, him and I have corresponded on this regularly. I have set out very clearly my expectation on the National Health Service in Scotland in terms of its culture, its speak-up culture, its attention to patient safety, and to ensure that whether it's staff or patients or anyone else besides, that they are treated seriously when they come forward with concerns and complaints, that those concerns and complaints are dealt with timiously and effectively, and that we always ensure that patient safety comes first.
Question number 2, Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the potential impact of US tariffs on Scotland's economy, in light of the announcement this weekend of President Trump's decision to impose new tariffs on the UK.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we are deeply concerned by the proposed use of tariffs by the President of the United States in order to change Greenland's future. Greenland's future should be decided by the people of Greenland, and threats of tariffs should not be a bargaining chip in place of reasonable dialogue between international partners. Any US tariff increases on the UK will be a concern for Scottish exporters, but so far the legal texts necessary for the US administration to implement such a policy have not been issued, and therefore it is not possible to assess the precise economic impact. Needless to say, any further tariffs would be deeply damaging for jobs and economic growth across Scotland, with the whisky industry reporting last year the loss of 1,000 jobs. We will continue to engage with key partners on this issue.
Evelyn Tweed.
The US is Scotland's largest export market, and many businesses will be concerned by this move by Washington. Can the Deputy First Minister set out what steps the Scottish Government are taking to ensure Scottish businesses can identify new markets and allow them to thrive in spite of these punitive tariffs?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, Evelyn Tweed is absolutely right to highlight how critical the US is for Scotland as an export market. And international trade is crucial to our economic growth and resilience. We will continue to promote the export growth of Scottish businesses in both current and emerging markets in response to that increasing global uncertainty. There are a number of examples of how we're looking to build trading relations across the world, including our participation in the Osaka Expo 2025, which opened new opportunities for businesses in Japan, and the second Scotland Week in the UAE later this month will further boost trade and investment ties. And plans for increasing our engagement with India are also advancing well. We've also approved and financed 19 Chamber of Commerce-led trade missions through our International Trade Partnership Programme.
Evelyn Tweed.
European leaders have stated their full support for Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. The European Council and European Commission presidents have warned that tariffs would undermine transatlantic relations and risk a dangerous downward spiral. Does the Scottish Government support their calls for international law to be upheld, NATO allies to respect the sovereignty of its member states, and for the future of Greenland to be decided solely by the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, US tariff increases would be a real concern for Scottish exporters, and there are well-established sources which are detailing those concerns right now. I welcome the clear statement from Greenland of its right to self-determination and the endorsement of that by European leaders and the UK Government. Decisions concerning Greenland can only be made by the people of Greenland, and we are clear that all nations must abide by the international rules-based system.
Mercedes Vialba.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. According to research from the Commonwealth think tank, Scotland has one of the most foreign-owned economies in Europe. Dependence on overseas direct investment not only bleeds Scotland of the wealth required to fund our public services, it also pressures Scottish politicians like our First Minister to appease foreign capital through lowering taxes, weakening workers' rights and eroding environmental standards. Such reliance leaves Scotland vulnerable to dramatic geopolitical change like Trump's latest tariffs. Given this threat, does the Minister agree that what Scotland needs is not further private foreign ownership, but a strong domestic industrial strategy?
I do reject much of that characterisation of the Scottish economy, and certainly reject any suggestion that the First Minister is under any pressure but the pressure of voters themselves who have democratically elected the Scottish Government to ensure that Scotland's economy is growing, that it is prosperous, and that we are able to support workers across the country. Now, the answer I was giving to the question initially was all about export. So actually that's the direct polar opposite of a question on foreign direct investment. And the point that we have made clear is that we are supporting exporters in Scotland. We are an island nation, and we are reliant on ensuring our goods and our services, which are produced here in Scotland to such high standards, reach markets across the world. And that includes North America, but it also includes the European Union. And of course, this government continues to back a return to the common market.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I remind members of my register of interests in relation to hospitality I received from the Scotch Whisky Association. That association warns that already the impact of tariffs has cost more than 1,000 jobs in Scotland and is costing the industry £20 million a month, and further tariffs would be devastating for the Scottish economy. Now, just a couple of months ago, the First Minister went to Washington to meet President Trump and came away very optimistic. So what's happened to that optimism? Is there anything the First Minister can do to try and reach out to President Trump to build on that warm relationship, to try and get this threat removed? And what can the Scottish Government do, looking at their budget, to try and support industries here that might be impacted?
Deputy First Minister.
Let me start with the first part of that question, because it was with the support of the Scottish Whisky Association themselves that the First Minister made as much progress as he did in terms of engaging directly with the President. Now, Murdo Fraser will appreciate that the work to secure an agreement and to nail down that progress is an issue for the UK Government, and I think the First Minister did an admirable job in highlighting the issues, particularly around the reciprocal damage. So this is not just about damage to the whisky industry, which is well detailed in terms of the economic damage and I think the loss of jobs that I outlined in my first answer, but it's also the damage that's replicated in the United States because of that reciprocal relationship with bourbon. So in terms of the progress that we will now make, as the member will appreciate, the First Minister is looking for all and any opportunities and has continued to use any and all opportunities to make the case for whisky and will continue to do so, but we are obviously in extremely unprecedented and unstable times.
Thank you. Members will appreciate the time. I'd be grateful for concise questions and responses. Patrick Harvey.
This goes far beyond export interests. The latest economic threat from Trump follows on from his attacks on the sovereignty of Greenland, his unilateral military action against Venezuela, his support for genocide in Palestine, his attempts to wreck international climate efforts, and the brutal violence of his regime against his own citizens. Surely it's clear that democratic countries can no longer treat this lawless US president as a security partner. Does the government agree that in this context, a formal visit by the UK's head of state would only feed Trump's ego and would continue a failed policy of appeasement against this extremist, and the visit should be cancelled?
On the substantive question,
well, the First Minister, I think, has been very robust over the weekend in particular, and was robust again last night in expressing very clearly that his view is that the future of Greenland is for the people of Greenland to determine, and that the First Minister's primary interest is in respecting the rule-based international system and protecting Scottish interests. And when it comes to the first question that I was asked, which was largely about export, this is about how to protect Scottish jobs and Scottish interests and protect communities across Scotland who are at risk right now.
Jamie Green.
Thank you. The way to beat economic bullying is to make trade easier. With the threat of tariffs looming, I think Scotland, the UK and the EU must unite in its stance against this US protectionism. But on a practical level, can I ask if the Scottish Government would join the Scottish Liberal Democrats in calling on the UK Government to implement an immediate cut to whisky duty of 5% to show that we stand behind our whisky industry, and to show President Trump that free trade will always trump isolationism?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I can confirm to the member that over previous budgets we have been very robust in representing the Scottish whisky industry and in calling for fair duty and excise. So that issue is on the record, and I think that goes back a few years when letters in my own name were drafted to the UK Government expressing that position. And we particularly feel it important to support the industry right now, which is seeing a massive impact from the tariffs and significant job losses, and on top of that, the economic damage on a weekly basis. So the figures are quite clear, and now is a time to be supporting our domestic production of whisky because of those international risks.
Thank you. Question number 3, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that grooming gangs are targeting children living in residential care homes in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
Presiding Officer, sexual abuse and exploitation of children are abhorrent crimes with devastating impacts on victims and their families. The first part of the independent national review, which I announced last month, will focus on rigorous, detailed scrutiny of local authorities' assessments of the threat and risk of group-based child sexual abuse and exploitation. The review, which will be undertaken by the 4 independent inspectorates, will assess local areas' understanding and response to known risk factors, including children who regularly go missing from home or care. If any harm or risk is identified during the review, this will be escalated immediately through the appropriate channels, including to Police Scotland as required, and will be acted on. And I intend to update Parliament more fully on this work in February.
Liam Kerr.
Well, I think the sinister revelation that grooming gangs are putting mobile phones into residential care homes exposes once again how much remains unknown and how sophisticated these vile predators actually are. But where is a full inquiry? would shine a light on all the dark corners of this nefarious, vicious practice, this government contents itself with an ill-defined review. Surely, in light of these latest revelations, the Cabinet Secretary now concedes that what is needed here is not a review, but the full inquiry that everyone is demanding.
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Mr Kerr for his question and his ongoing interest and pursuit of these matters, and I was very pleased that he attended the cross-party meeting that I held last week along with the Cabinet Secretary for Justice, in which we heard an update from Professor Alexis Jay from Police Scotland and also from the 4 independent inspectorates who will be leading this work. And I want to be again clear today, Presiding Officer, that the Government is not ruling out further inquiries. I made that point substantively in my statement to Parliament in December. But there is a need for an evidence base. That is exactly why the inspectorates are taking forward this work as appropriately, and I will update Parliament further to that end in February, as I intimated in my first response.
Liam Kerr.
Well, I'm afraid I think the Cabinet Secretary's response will disappoint so many, but she listed and places great reliance on those in the field. Now, last September's initial report of the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Subgroup found, and I quote, little evidence that training in Scotland adequately equips professionals with the skills needed to respond. Current practice often relies on children verbally disclosing their abuse before decisive protective action is taken. So, Cabinet Secretary, what meaningful, substantive action has this government taken to protect Scotland's children in the months since its own experts gave them this warning? And if something was done, why hasn't it worked?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Mr Kerr for his question. He raises a substantively important matter, and I'm also mindful, Presiding Officer, that every time we discuss these topics, victims of child sexual abuse may be listening, and I think it's important we discuss these issues in a sympathetic and appropriate response that is reflective of that trauma. I'm mindful of that, particularly in my own role in that regard. In terms of how children disclose or report on allegations in relation to child sexual abuse, there are a range of different ways in which that's undertaken. I know in my own experiences as a former teacher how that works in a school, but of course we have 4 different independent inspectorates who will be looking at these issues in more clear detail in relation to the ways in which that works within their relevant responsibilities, Presiding Officer. I do want to come back to Parliament with a fuller update in regard to the substantive point the member raises, which is hugely important, and I've been very clear throughout my time in responding to the Government's approach to this, that we need to hear from victims of child sexual abuse to ensure that we learn from their experiences to improve and to eradicate this type of behaviour in our society. But I do think it's important that we work on a cross-party basis on this issue, given its importance, and to that end, that's exactly the approach I will continue to take forward. At the meeting we had last week, along with Mr Kerr, I also suggested we would have a fuller update for MSPs in March that will allow for a consistent information flow to MSPs regarding the Government's work on this topic, and I'll be able to share more with members of this on this point in February in my statement, but then again in March before Parliament dissolves.
Paul McLennan.
Officer, all sexual abuse and exploitation of children, of course, is horrific, and it's important that we treat this issue sensitively when we discuss it. Can the Cabinet Secretary set out more detail of what the National Review will involve, and what more can she say about the evidence and information it collates and what will happen when it's received?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do want to be absolutely clear that the 4 inspectorates who are leading the National Review are independent of government. They will have no fear or favour in the work that they have been instructed to undertake urgently and at pace, but crucially those agencies have powers to compel public authorities to provide information that they request. Those powers will be critical in terms of the success of the review. Public agencies will not be able to refuse to cooperate, and the inspectorates will help to obtain the evidence needed to inform future decisions and investigations. And once the independent national review is complete, the National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, which is independently chaired by Professor Alexis Jay, will consider the findings and provide that expert advice to ministers on our next steps. And as I set out previously, if any harm or risk is identified throughout that process, this will be escalated, including to Police Scotland as appropriate.
Pauline McNeill.
There is a lot of interest in this sensitive issue, and I believe that Scotland had not addressed the need to interrogate the data for an assessment of the scale of the problem, not until now. But given that it could take months or years, and we haven't been given a timescale, I don't think, and we already know that children in the care system are at the highest risk I ask the Cabinet Secretary to elaborate on the immediate actions that the Government will take to identify and protect children who are most at risk. I mean, if there is any validity to the reports that Liam Kerr refers to, I think there's a need for urgency, and we can't wait to protect children right now.
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Pauline McNeill for her question. In relation to the reports themselves, I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment. I have read the press article in question, of course, and those points have been put to my officials. But in relation to criminal activity, that would be a matter for Police Scotland to investigate. However, in relation to timescales, I did set out in my previous answer that I will come back to Parliament in the coming weeks in February to give a fuller update. And, of course, at the meeting which Ms McNeill and other MSPs attended last week, there are a range of different agencies there who set out some of their work in relation to the next steps in terms of their responsibilities. And I have committed to further update for MSPs in March. So there are a range of different points in that regard in terms of the timescales we are currently working to, but I do hope to say more in relation to the detail on next steps in the statement to Parliament in the coming weeks.
And Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Serious Organised Crime Task Force has acknowledged that the scale of child sexual abuse and exploitation is hidden and underreported with weak national monitoring. Given that the Government admits it does not know the true scale of this abuse, what specific evidential threshold from the National Review is the Cabinet Secretary needing before establishing a full national inquiry into grooming gangs in Scotland?
Thank you. I note that, Ms Dowie, we have only been able to engage with an audio, and we'll certainly look into that issue, but I'd be grateful, Cabinet Secretary, if you could respond to that question. Thank you.
I thank Ms Dowie for her question. The first part of Ms Dowie's question related to the way in which we record and report the crimes that we've been discussing today, Presiding Officer. I think we should also reflect on the power imbalance which often exists in relation to child sexual exploitation, which is also a causation factor of why we see such under-reporting where there is that power imbalance. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of the review, but I will give Ms Dowie and MSPs a fuller update, as I have set out today, Presiding Officer, in February, when I have that update from the agencies in relation to their progress of their work in terms of their statutory responsibilities and the review that I announced in December.
Thank you. That concludes topical questions.